There's a culture war shaking up Nashville, and a polarizing song by Jason Aldean is at the center of this fight. At the heart of all this, a question about who country music really belongs to. Today on the show, what is Nashville's future and who gets to define it? I'm Amil Niazi, sitting in for Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This is Commotion. Take a listen to this.
Cuss out a cop, spit in his face, stomp on the flag and light it up. Yeah, you think you're tough? Well, try that in a small town. See how far you make it down the road. Around here we take care of our own. You cross that line, it won't take long for you to find out. I recommend you don't. Try that in a small town.
That's a bit of the latest single from country singer Jason Aldean. It's called Try That in a Small Town. And for the past couple of weeks, it's been the most polarizing country song in America. Critics call its message troubling, saying it seems to take aim at those with criticisms of the police and the American government. Now, it probably doesn't help that parts of the music video were shot in Tennessee at a location where a black teenager was lynched in 1927. Country music channel CMT even pulled the music video from its rotation. But fans of Jason Aldean and the song itself have arguably been louder, helping turn this into a chart topper. Journalists Andrea Williams and Emily Nussbaum have been following this story closely. Welcome to you both. Thank you for being here today.
Thanks for having us.
Andrea, I want to start with you. You've heard the song. You have seen the now kind of infamous music video. What is your reaction to all of this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that people are rightfully upset and offended. There is clear imaging of, in the lyrics of sundown towns and this sort of vigilante justice, even when he's talking about, these events that are or these actions that could be deemed, seen illegal or, that would necessitate some kind of response. We know that when we talk about sundown towns, it's really not about that. You could be in trouble just for staying there after dark. And then, of course, you move to the video and he's very clearly got all these images from protests. No mention of why people had to protest, but just the fact that they are. And so, yeah, I say all the time, I don't think that every country music fan is racist, but I do think that every person who is racist or who longs for this bygone era when Black people were in their place, they listen to country music. And Jason Aldean knows his audience, but it's clear that this is not a Jason Aldean issue. This is a country music issue.
Mm-hmm. And for those who are not familiar with that phrase, sundown town, could you just give a quick explainer of what that means?
Yeah, it was basically that Black people were to be seen and out of town by nightfall. If they were coming in town to work during the day, that was fine. But then they needed to be out of town and go back to where they came from by nightfall, or else anything could happen.
Mm-hmm. I mean, Emily, we'll get into it a bit later with your piece on just how explicit those lyrics seem to suggest this idea of a sundown town. But this is not the first time that Jason Aldean has made headlines for his perceived politics. How in line with his sort of brand is this new song?
Well, I'd say that the song is cruder than the songs that he usually sings, but it's not a big departure. But I have to add, the main thing about Jason Aldean is that he's a really boring country artist. He doesn't write his own lyrics. Most of his radio singles are the most basic brand of bro country. They're just pre-chewed, self-pitying laments about trucks and dirt roads. Mm-hmm. Politically speaking, he is a Trump supporter. And he goes to the big conservative conference CPAC with his wife, Brittany, and she's become a big conservative right-wing influencer. There's a different country star who called her Insurrection Barbie. But the thing is, this whole thing makes him sound much more interesting than he is from my perspective. Like he's this scandalous figure. And honestly, he's just one of the sourer versions of mainstream kind of rich Music Row product cosplaying as a blue collar outlaw. And there's nothing rebellious or exciting about this. It's just a scandal that sells a very familiar type of music. That's almost the only music that gets played on country radio.
Right.
But doesn't represent what goes on in country music in the broader sense.
Yes, and your piece really touches on that, and I'm excited to get into that. But Jason Aldean's response to this backlash via his Twitter account reads, quote, "There is not a single lyric in the song that references race or points to it, and there isn't a single video clip that isn't real news footage. And while I can try and respect others to have their own interpretation of a song with music, this one goes too far." Andrea, we were just sort of talking about how explicit the lyrics seem, and yet he's trying to say that there's nothing in there referencing race or politics. What do you make of that response?
Yeah, I mean, the response did what it was supposed to do, right? Like, he's addressing it because this story became bigger than country music, but also he's doing this, gaslighting, straddling the fence thing, because at the end of the day, he's not going to capitulate to the woke mob, right? We know what we hear, but at the end of the day, he doesn't ever have to say anything really, because, as Emily sort of spoke to, he is propped up by the mainstream. He's going to sell concert tickets. He's going to get streamed. He's going to rise to the top of the charts. Doesn't matter how good he sounds. He, again, knows that audience well, that audience that he individually and country music collectively has cultivated. And so, yeah, I didn't expect anything more. The only reason we got a response is because, again, this story got picked up everywhere.
Mm-hmm. So, Emily, let's jump into the piece that you wrote for The New Yorker. It's a deep dive.
By the way, I'm sorry. I just want to jump in and add one thing. You know that part where he says there isn't a single clip that isn't real news footage? Mm-hmm. I can't remember her name. I'm sorry. But there's a great woman on TikTok who actually investigated the footage he uses. And not only is it not footage of American protests, it comes from other countries, including Canada, and it's stock footage that they put in. So even the most basic level, his defense of his video doesn't hold up. I mean, even leaving aside the deceptiveness of the other stuff, just, it's just BS.
You have to love TikTok for the fact checks. They are always on it in such a perfect way. So, Emily, going back to that piece that you wrote for The New Yorker, it's a look at how class, race, and gender politics are shaping Nashville's sort of new scene and the music industry of late there. So how does this story fit into that larger conversation that you were sort of getting at in your story?
To a certain extent, mainly as a distraction. There's no doubt that mainstream country music, and I don't think my piece is Pollyanna-ish about this, it has enormous problems of bigotry and structural bigotry, especially based on what gets onto mainstream radio. But people who don't listen to country music already think that it's all people like Jason Aldean, and that's not factually the truth. There's an extremely complex and varied world in Nashville and outside of Nashville of people who love and play country music. And part of what I was trying to elevate in my piece and discuss is the world of both on the countryside and on the Americana side. And this is a whole complex split. People like Ashley McBryde, Brandy Clark, Jason Isbell, and the Black Opry that has been organized by Holly G, who is a fantastic organizer who pulled this whole thing together in 2020. There's a whole history of Black country that's not really touched on in this, and Adeem the artist as well. And a lot of the people that I write about in the piece come from exactly the backgrounds, the small town backgrounds that Jason Aldean only pretends to come from and tries to define. And so to me, the problem is that the biggest story isn't always the best-selling person or the most scandalous thing. It's also the best and most interesting artists who go way outside that category.
Andrea, what do you think of this? Is it a distraction, or is it kind of par for the course? You're in Nashville. You've been covering this industry for a minute. What do you make of what Emily's saying there and what her piece sort of gets at?
Yeah, I think that it is par for the course. I think it is a reflection of the actual country music industry. Emily's right that there are all of these groups and individuals who are, pushing against that common narrative of what country music is, who it's for, who it's by. But when we talk about this tussle for power, who owns Nashville, there isn't really a power struggle at this point. All of these people are pretty much on the margins. And I'm not saying that to dismiss their music. I'm simply saying that when we talk about this multi-billion-dollar industry that is country music, these people are not scratching the surface of it because we have not done enough collectively, including gathering the power of people outside of the industry to push against the industry on a consistent, sustained basis. So everybody gets kind of pushed to the side. We kind of ride these ebbs and flows of movements, if you will, where every now and then we'll put a Black person on the stage or a queer person on the stage. And then ultimately we go back to normal. And I understand the seductiveness of wanting to say, oh my gosh, things are getting better, but they are not. They're just not. You know, Emily spoke to a songwriter in her piece who's been writing songs in Nashville for years. I don't know of any Black women who are not artists who've been signed to publishing deals who can sustain themselves from songwriting when they're not getting cuts. Emily spoke about going down to Broadway and actually having fun. If you go to Broadway, there ain't a lot of Black people that get to perform, that get to make money on a regular basis in this tourist spot where you will make money. So going back to 2020, I talked a lot about, well, how do we know the industry is shifting? Well, for me, it's our people eating. Our people eating from this multi-billion-dollar industry that Nashville points to as this sort of homegrown, self-sustained entity. And right now, it hasn't shifted at all.
I mean, yeah, do you want to respond, Emily?
No, I mean, that makes complete sense. And I knew that when I wrote about the Broadway section, the racial dynamics of Broadway, which I know people are not familiar, but Broadway is the section of Nashville that people now call Nash Vegas. It's a big magnet for bachelorette parties. And it has all of these nightclubs that are owned by mostly conservative major mainstream country stars. The entire town has transformed in many different ways. But yes, the base level problem, as she was discussing, is money and people being able to sustain themselves while they develop as artists. That's the part that hasn't changed, in part because, as I know you've written about, it hasn't changed on the other side of the industry, not just the artists, but the people who are within, executives and managers and all of the other people within it. That part has also not diversified.
Right. But I think I'm going to say this one last thing. I think it also becomes harder too, because we get all these people like you who are like, I've always loved country music. And if you can say that you've always loved country music and you can find yourself at home in these places like these bars on Broadway without pushing against the status quo, we will never generate enough power to change things on either side of the coin. There's always this sort of, I love it. I hate that it looks like this for all these groups of people, but you want to find, that light, that spot where, I can get behind this, right? Like the men in the bro country, but what about these women over here? When as a whole, the industry itself needs to be torn down. And unless we can get to that point collectively, it will never happen.
Well, Andrea, I want to just leave it quickly with you. We only have about 30 seconds left. But what can we in the media do differently when covering these types of stories? Because you go back to Morgan Wallen, it gave him a bump. Jason Aldean is getting a huge bump from all of this attention. So what needs to change in the way we're covering things?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And for me, the hope is that even once the story goes away, and it will, that we continue to highlight what is wrong about the industry. I feel like we get these stories, these Morgan Wallen, Jason Aldean type stories that everybody wants to talk about. And then when we go back to normal, it's like nobody really wants to talk about the issues that are pervasive on a day-to-day basis. We want to pick out the things that we can highlight to make us feel better about this industry that is really broken. But I think if we focus more on the issues on a regular basis, number one, we start to understand it better. And then maybe we can get collectively angry enough that we aren't okay going to the Broadway bars and hanging out and dancing and laughing. And we aren't okay just highlighting the women who are really doing well in this industry, the couple of women who are doing well in this industry that on the whole, we say this doesn't work for anybody in it. let's tear it down and build a new thing.
Andrea, thank you so much. Thank you both for this conversation. Andrea Williams is an award-winning journalist and New York Times bestselling author in Nashville, and Emily Nussbaum is an author and staff writer for The New Yorker. I'm Amil Niazi, sitting in for Elamin Abdelmahmoud, and you are listening to Commotion. You've been hearing a lot about the actors' strike in Hollywood, and we want to zero in on one particular issue affecting every single actor. It matters whether you're an extra or you're first on the call sheet, and that's artificial intelligence. The tech is changing at such a rapid pace, it's hard to even understand all the different ways it could be used. Could you soon be watching a new movie starring your favorite dead celeb? And do you even want to? I unpacked this story with Sinead Bovell. She's a technology educator. We started by hearing from Brian Cox. The Succession actor was at a rally in the UK last week supporting the SAG-AFTRA strike. Here's what he had to say about AI.
Now, as to the AI business, I got a message this morning actually from an actor who's in negotiations. Now he's playing a reasonable part in a TV show, and he's on what they call a supporting artist contract. And he was told in no unfirm terms that they would keep his image and do what they like with it. Now that is a completely unacceptable position, and that's what we have to stop.
Okay, you can hear that he's obviously very passionate about this, and it sort of seems like it all bubbled to the surface very quickly. It was only a few weeks ago we were talking about that Black Mirror episode, Joan is Awful, and wow, wouldn't it be so crazy if they started using Salma Hayek's likeness, doing whatever they want with it. And now here we are, Brian Cox is, sort of raging about it at a rally. So how did this sort of become such a key issue, and what do you make of actors' concerns about this issue?
When you look at the way artificial intelligence it's felt like it's come on the scene at full force this past year, all of these headlining, ChatGPT, DALL-E, all of these different generative AI systems coming to market. We're at the moment where, Netflix tried to sell itself to Blockbuster, and Blockbuster turned them down because they didn't recognize what was actually about to happen or the potential disruption. Mm-hmm. I think that's the moment we're in with artificial intelligence. And so on the one hand, that maybe seems overwhelming because we know streaming transformed the industry, but it also means we have an opportunity to shape the evolution of this technology. We just have to seize it and do our best to steer it in a direction that's fair, exciting. We can capitalize on all these great opportunities. But yes, I think the actors have every right to really stand up for how technology is impacting them, because things weren't fair in the streaming world. Streaming has been amazing for the viewers, not so great for the creatives. So let's try to not repeat that in the world of AI.
Mm-hmm. And, so far it seems like it's been a lot of kind of concern and fear and hypotheticals. But what are we actually seeing in terms of AI on the screen right now?
We all interact with AI in movies all the time. So first of all, if you even watch something on streaming platforms, AI has recommended that to you. A lot of recent movies from like The Irishman, they use AI to de-age actors or to edit faces. If you've seen, I think it's the latest Indiana Jones movie with Harrison Ford, that used a lot of AI. Set backgrounds are often artificial intelligence, especially in the world of animation.
So what do we actually know about what SAG-AFTRA is after and how the studios have sort of responded, in between these two competing interests? What's in the middle there?
An artist's intellectual property, their likeness, their image, that is going to be the key asset in a more digitized future. And so we have SAG-AFTRA saying that, or SAG-AFTRA, if an artist's image is digitized and a studio wants to use that, an artist has to give consent, the actor has to give consent, they have to sign off on it, and they have to be fairly compensated. What SAG-AFTRA is telling us is the pushback from studios and production companies is a world where, especially for background actors, you maybe get paid to have your digital likeness created, maybe that's you scanned, and then they can kind of use that in perpetuity. And I think that would be absolutely disastrous. Before anybody's digital likeness is ever used, they should always be able to sign off on it. And it can't be this kind of one and done exploitative agreement.
I feel like the words in perpetuity are what kind of sends shivers down a lot of people's spines because, that's forever and you're only getting paid for it once. Well, what are some guardrails you think would work? Some things that would allow us to both embrace the technology, but also make sure that people are being treated fairly?
Yeah, so I think supporting actors in creating their digital replicas or digital twins, I think will eventually become in some way the norm. And in some ways it could be great. We might see actors send a digital twin or their digital replica to a commercial if they can't actually fly across the world to film something about sunglasses. Or maybe they can be in 2 movies at the same time. But without question, actors need to be able to own their digital likeness through and through. And they need to have consent before their digital replica is used and after. And I specify after because we could step into a world where I'm calling it unrecognizable editing, where a movie studio shoots a movie, they use their digital twin to edit a scene because maybe in post it was terrible. And instead of bringing everybody back on, you can just use the digital twin. Great. But maybe they edit it to the point where you don't recognize your performance and you wouldn't have agreed to that. So consent is so important. I think we also need to make sure that actors' digital likeness isn't used to train the AI actors of the future. And I'm not sure, I don't know if you can retrospectively go back and say you can't use that movie I was in and train future AI generating systems. But I think that would only be fair that studios don't actually train AI systems of the future on past performances. And then I also think actors should be informed when a character they may be acting with could be AI. And on the one hand, it might be because an actor just doesn't want to work alongside an AI, but you also want to make sure that an AI character is not maybe reflecting a community that they don't necessarily belong to, or the writer of that character doesn't belong to. And there's kind of some misappropriation of community there that an actor maybe won't want to put their name beside.
Yeah, that's so interesting. That consent part is exactly kind of what rankled Salma Hayek in Joan is Awful. And a lot of those issues did pop up in that Black Mirror episode. So, CGI has been creating these virtual worlds for years, but AI works a little bit differently than that. We're not talking about sort of filling in extras in the Roman Colosseum. What makes this a bigger threat to actors?
What artificial intelligence does is it really takes the automation to the next level, to main character level. So not only can you not necessarily even need a human, you can clone voices, you can clone or generate music for the background. There's all of these different industries that also get impacted, right? Makeup artists and hair, costume design. There's all of these knock-on effects with artificial intelligence. So it kind of disrupts the entire process.
I mean, I'm such a cynic when it comes to this stuff, and I'm trying to be really open-minded about it. But we had a filmmaker named Scott Mann on Commotion a few months ago, and he used AI in his film Fall to change F-bombs to some friendlier, family-friendly language. But he doesn't use the technology lightly, and here's what he said about the ethics of bringing AI into art.
The innovation needs to go hand in hand with the protection of artistic rights. It often comes down to basically who is using it, but more importantly, that everyone has consented to what goes on.
What's your reaction to that?
So 2 things. I do want to highlight, and you had mentioned that he used AI to edit kind of F-bombs or swear words out of a movie. And I do want to take a second to point out something positive about AI. So with artificial intelligence, there is a world actually where we film a movie once and we can use AI to edit it for multiple different age groups. So maybe you film the explicit version and we can generate we could use AI to generate a family or more PG version. But in terms of the challenging aspects that he spoke to, absolutely, I think we need intellectual property protection. People need to be able to own their creative work and creative contributions, or else all of this literally falls apart.
That's my conversation with Sinead Bovell. She's a futurist and founder of Way. And that's it for the show today. I'm Amil Niazi, sitting in for Elamin Abdelmahmoud. Thank you so much for listening.